We're nearly done with the print actions page now. And one of the last things we have to do is we have this paper size settings. Now this is really far too large. And then we have the buttons here. If we take a look at our original, you can see this is the current application that is live and sells and does its job. And this is part of the UI that we're recreating. You can see this print profile section here is really this print settings here. And when you click edit, you've got this whole wall of nasty UI that ultimately is probably going to look similar, just looks a bit cleaner because it is just a whole dump of information to select specific printers and settings per paper size. So it is what it is. It's like a big dump of information. But this won't be on the current page. This will be something you add and edit later. And this is then where you select one of those. So this select box here with name and description becomes this list here. We'll chuck that into the UI. There's nothing new there. It's going to be one of these list items and bound to some settings. We'll make some new buttons ready for saving and closing. And then what we'll try and do is, as we are toggling between these items, warn the user and prevent them from exiting, or at least hide and show these buttons when the data is ready to be sent. So let's just dive in. Firstly, I've gone ahead and made a few more button styles off camera. So there was no point kind of going over this. We've done this many times now. I've added these outline but coloured versions. So as well as the alert and danger, I've added a success button. And then I've added the outline styles as well, just to give us a bit more choice. In here, you can see I have basically added them here with the classes for outline and alert, outline danger, outline and success. So we can see them here. And then in the styles, I've gone ahead and updated the success button here to give us a success button, which is just a copy and paste of the danger with the new success gradient and hover gradient. And then in the outlines, what I've done is added the outline styles here and all of the outline styles here, a big wash of them. This is all committed to GitHub. So if you're following along with this, instead of kind of pausing and looking here, you can just go to github.com/angel6/YouTube. Then you can see the project here, Avalonia batch process. But if we click on the commits here, it will take us to the latest commits. And there's the success buttons and outline styles. If we click into that, you can see the files I've altered. So I've altered the app.xaml here, added this gradient on line 81. And then in the buttons.xaml here, we've added those classes where we mentioned, and then these are the new styles that have been added. So you can easily follow along and look at the styles we've done. There's nothing magical there, so you should be able to copy and paste or follow from the GitHub page. Back in this view, what we need to do is add another list, so one of these lists. And it doesn't want to be that long because it'll look daft being spanned over 2 columns. So we'll just put it below this general settings. If we scroll up, we have general settings as a stack panel. So below this grid, which will be these items here, we'll want effectively another label and text box like this. And this one will say print settings, or rather printer settings. And then selects the profiles to use for paper sizes, something like that. And then below it we can have a list box, which we can copy from here for now. We'll just literally take this list box and copy it to here. That will give us another list box, which is, because of the UI, automatically bound and works the same. And you can see the problem here, we want this to expand and fill. So because we're in a stack panel and things will only take up the desired amount of space, we need this to now be a grid, which is kind of a pain because we've got a lot of items. So we've got 1, 2, this is a grid, so that's 3, 4, 5, and 6. So we'll need 6 columns plus all the spacings in between. And this is all just so we can expand that last item. So if we go to the general columns here, you can see it's a stack panel. That needs to change to a grid. We can't do spacing that way now, so instead what we'll do is in the row definitions, we'll do auto, and then 10 was the spacing, and we'll just repeat this. So if you're unsure, copy it a few times, and we'll start filling it out. So we just have a load of auto rows with spacings, and now every element inside, you can see is all messed up at the minute. We need to put them in the right grid rows. So the first one is grid row 0, the next one is grid row 1, 2 with the spacing. So you've got 0, then a spacing, then 2. The next one's going to be 4, then 6, then 8. So this one will be grid.row 4. This will be grid.row 6, grid.row 8, and finally grid.row 10. Now these are all in the right rows. We just need to go back up and count. So you got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This last one then wants to be a star to take up the remaining space. And now we have a grid that fills the last item, which is what we want. We need to bind this to an actual list of something that can host that information. And that will be in the actions print view model, because this is not part of this overview. It's actually part of this data. It's going to be in the print view model. And it's going to be a list of names and strings. So we're actually going to need another subclass, which doesn't necessarily need a view model because it's just a name and string. But the proper way is to have a class with just name and string inside. So name and description. If we go to the actual application, we can click one of these and say click edit. And you can see this overview list is taking some of the data from what will become the view model of the actual profile. So it's already got name and description, and then all of this information as list items. So what we will show here will be bound to this view model item here, which will be a string name, string description, and then this is going to have to be a further list containing another view model item inside. So let's construct all that up now as view models. We'll create a new view model. We'll call this actions print, printer profile view model. We'll make sure to implement the view model base like the rest. Make this partial. And now in here we can fill it out with all the information. One was the name. And the other was the description. And then there's a third item, which will be for all of these items in here. So we need another view model now, and this will be a list of this view model that will contain the type, printer name, printer settings, all of this lot here. And this is obviously a printer settings view model. So with that in mind, we'll create another view model. We'll just copy and paste this one, rename it to actions printer profile view model. So this will be actions printer settings. You don't want the name to grow too much, so you want to try and keep it constructive. And inside of here now is where we need to update this. It hasn't renamed. We need all of these elements inside of here. And that now should cover all of the items. You can see most of them are just simply strings, even though they're locked here and these are a fixed list. The view model isn't aware of the data side of the program, so it's unaware that this is a fixed list. The same with the printer names. This is discoverable on this computer, so it's going to find what printers are available. So this will pass off to a service that's going to return the list. But again, in here, we don't want that limit. So we'll have to pass in a list of possible printer names and limit the UI that way. But ultimately, the backend is not going to be limited by that. So this view model is going to stay flexible. The same will go for paper sizes. Width and height are just doubles. Or in fact, one is still a string. There we go. The orientation, because this is pretty much always only 3 possible options, not selected, which will be default. Portrait or landscape. I've done a nullable boolean, so if it's null, it's default. If it's true, it's portrait. If it's false, it's landscape. Source tray is again based on the printer we select. So if we selected the One-1 PDF, you can see source tray doesn't have any options, whereas this one has a bunch of custom, very specific options. So all this kind of populating of information will be in a service, and the view model simply displays the information. So if you want to copy that as is, and just one thing we almost missed is there's a copies down here. So it will need another value for the number of copies, but that isn't on this part anyway, because this is the printer settings. This is the sublist. This will be on the printer profile. So it's now going to have a name, a description. It will have a private observable collection of the new actions settings and this will be printer settings. And now it will have the private int copies. And with that, I think we've successfully cloned the data of this part of the application. And we now want to bind it to this kind of list. Before we can do that though, we kind of need to generate and fetch this information and put it on the main view model as well. On the main print view model, we need to add specifically an actions printer profile view model, and we'll call this one the actions printer profile. So this will ultimately be the selected printer profile if there is one. It can be null because it can be not selected, so it will default to a default setting. So that can be a question mark to be nullable. And then in the UI, we want to bind the list to a list of all items, which will live in the actions page view model. This will store a list of possible print profiles, which means it will want to be a list like this. Let's move this down. And this will be a list of action printer profiles. Call it printer profiles. And now we need to be able to fetch this as well. So you can see when we refresh the actions page now, if we get to refresh what we're now calling print list, we could call this refresh print page, or refresh print actions data. That probably makes a bit more sense. And then here we should fetch from databases and things, but again at the minute we're just making them up. So we'll do the same here. We'll have printer profiles equals, and then we'll have a new array. And then here we can now start making all of the new values. So I'll make one called print landscape description, and this can just say print all files in landscape mode. In here then we'll have copies of say 3, and then we'll actually update that, print all files in landscape mode 3 copies. And this printer settings, this really is a list of already configured print settings, but the job of populating all the possible options in the first place would also come from the service. So in here, we're going to end up repeating ourselves if we just type in print settings here. Because we're not actually going to see this yet, I'm not even going to bother populating this. We'll probably populate that when we come to do the actual printer settings page. So we could always put a note in here to do populate printer settings. But for now, that's all we'll need. We can copy and paste the profile, say 3 times. Print portrait, print all files in portrait mode, and we just remove that. We'll have copies as 1, and then a final one, black and white A3. Make all A3 prints black and white, and we'll do copies 5. That will give us enough information now to do something with. Even though this is fake info, we can now bind to it. So we've got the printer profiles section. We went back to here. We already have a list view, and it's this one here. And then instead of print list now, we can have the printer profiles. Now we compile. This might need a bit more first. There you go. So now it's got the printer profiles. The selected item will come to in a moment. Selection changed. We probably don't need to handle anything for now. And then the template here, it's not actions print view model now. It's actions print profile view model. And then in the label, we can change this to name. We won't have a button yet because we'll probably have a separate page for managing these. So we'll get rid of the button. And you can see there's our list at the minute with just names in. But we do want the description probably as well. So we can either have the description on hover, or we can show it as part of this. all depends on how long the descriptions are expected to be. And we might want to do, say, let's have a go with this. We'll do a stack panel instead of a grid. We've got one label here. We'll do a text block. Get rid of all this surplus that we don't need. Text wrapping wrap. Text can be bound to the description. And there we have then a nice detailed explanation, and I think that will work. Don't know whether we have, do we have a H3 setting or just a bold? No, we don't. Font weight, we could just set directly for now as bold, or even maybe black. There we go. So I think that's good enough for a little visual. Let's just run this in the application and make sure we're happy with that. Go to actions, and we have still a cast violation somewhere. Unable to cast actions printer profile view model to actions print view model. So let's just take a look at where we've left some information. And my guess will be the selected item that we didn't actually finish doing. So all we need to do when we select between these is for the selected item, this is where we can say the currently selected item here, and then set it up to be inside of there, the actions printer profile. So we probably don't want to call it actions printer profile. We'll just call it printer profile. Just press F2 to rename. And then we're getting the warning at the minute as well that it's obviously possibly null. But we ignore that for now. As long as the UI is built correctly, we won't hit that error of it being null. If we run this again, no, we still have a further error somewhere else. And if we look a little further down, we have the style as well here for the selection. This also needs to update to the printer profile view model. And that's when we set the as selected inside. Now, this actually isn't needed here because there is no selected item on here. It's getting set for us here. So that style can actually go in this instance. And we shouldn't need that. And there we go. We can now get into the page. We can select something. And you can see if we select one, go back in, this isn't updating. So we need this to bind still. So there is a, oh, actually, yes, it is updating. So you can see if we go to the first one, second one, third one, it's remembering the selection as well. And there's one more thing to consider as well. This can be the default profile. So what we will probably do is simply return as part of the data service, which at the minute is a dummy here. I think we'll just return a printer profile that has the default option in. Save having some kind of custom UI where, say, you click a selected item and it unchecks and it's not obvious that it's a not selected item, it's not a default item. I think we'll just add it to the list as a default item. So to simulate that and to make things easier, we'll copy and paste that and we'll just do something like this. And then say use all default settings. And then we could also even have this as the default selected profile in the view model when we create a new one. If we do actions and we click between, this now wouldn't be nullable because we're going to rely on the data service sending as a default. That means what we will do is we'd update the default option here to not be default. And when we create these profiles, at the moment, they are being created without a setting. So to simulate what the database will have to return, we can also then add inside of each of these the printer profile. And this could be a new printer profile. And obviously we'd have to then populate it with the default values for the visuals. So for now, we could move that and say default printer profile, just in this temporary code here, and paste that there. And remember, all this will be fetched from a service, so it wouldn't be made anything like this. We're just simulating our default data to appear as it would when it finally comes from a real service. So with those three done, we have all there. When we create a new item, the new item will also want the same thing, which at the minute we don't have that exposed. So let's just move that further outside of this class. But this is because we don't have the services yet. So we'll put a note up here. We'll have this here, and now we have the default profile, which we can give the naming convention. And let's see if this works when we have proper references to the actual values, which is how it would work if we had the database services in there. This would work. And in fact, that's the duplicate there. Remove that one. Now with that bound in, yep, you can see, yep, that's actually now working. So we have the selection correctly bound, and that's because we are storing references to the original classes. And when we come to use the service, you'll find out this is exactly what will happen anyway. You'll end up with references that get pulled in, and we bind them correctly. So we'll leave the ID in because that will be part of the database, but we will remove these once we have the database service. Otherwise, the binding gets very confusing. That's it for this one, guys. We'll do the buttons for the save and cancel next, as well as the warning when you're navigating in and out.